There are two sheets. Everybody's walking around with them. Not everybody, but hot pink and goldenrod. I always say, give me bright things. Slid right off my bald spot. I try to keep this updated. People always ask me, so where do you find out all this information? I can tell you where you don't find it out. 3, 6, 10, CNN, MSNB, Communist, or whatever it's called, and Fox News is not a whole lot better. So these are not difficult. It's amazing to me how much sometimes, not you, other Christians, just don't bother to work at it to figure out where do we get the information. Well, it's right here. All these URLs, it's so easy to tick, 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 and go there. A lot of great stuff. So if you're looking for, and I've got it divided into categories. I'm not going to walk through it all. You can read it for yourself. But that top portion, Israel News and Analysis, if you want to know what's going on in Israel. And some of these are liberal sites, like J-Post or Jerusalem Post or Arut Shava, and what's the other one? I always forget it. But anyhow, they tend to be on the liberal side, just like we've got liberal news outlets here. They've got liberal news outlets over there. But also Ynet News, Israel Today is a great site. So you can get really good information there. And of course, international news, all these other things. International intelligence and analysis. Some of these things are subscription sites. You can get some free information. You got to pay more if you want a subscription. I'm not recommending that. I don't have subscriptions for most of these things. But it's worth your while. It's amazing how much Christians, for whatever reason, just choose not to be informed on these things, but it's worth your while to do that. And then, of course, the goldenrod will sort of follow along with. Oh, yeah, that's right. Okay, so that's that. As we get started here tonight, before we do anything, I suspect you've noticed that Hurricane Helene came through last week and has created an enormous amount of damage. I had a slide, but I forgot to put it in the lineup, but I'm sure you've seen a lot of the videos from these places. I mean, you can look at a place like Asheville, North Carolina, and it's a mess. But that's a place that's easy to get to, so that's where video's coming from. But there are some places that are just, the earth has been scrubbed. I mean, just scrubbed. And no access to people, no access to the towns, no access to people. There's a lot of strange videos that you see, and some are true and some are not. But in any event, bad times down there. And the slide I thought of was, it was a satellite picture of the United States at night. And you can see the swath where the hurricane came in at the Gulf of Mexico, not New Mexico, Mexico, and then just comes on up and then back out again toward Georgia, and just no lights, just gone. And it's not like, we're going to get the lights on in a week. There's no wires, there's no poles, it's just gone. It's Little House days. Not even that, there's no anything. So serious stuff. And I was talking to Gary and Sandy Reese. Many of you know them, but not everybody does. So Gary and Sandy have been working with Samaritan's Purse for many years. You see our truck out there. They gave us a truck for local use. But Gary has been running these Go teams for a while. So if you're interested in volunteering, there's information here on the sheet. You can just go and volunteer. But I'm going to invite, Gary's around here somewhere. Where's Gary? Oh, there you are. Stand up. Come on up. Bring Sandy with you. Yeah. And just before we get into Israel and all that, I wanted them to give us an update on what is happening, what will be happening, what you can do if you're interested right now. So come on up and talk away.
Good evening. There's a lot of groups out there that do good work in disasters, but there's only one group that does it in the name of Jesus Christ, and that's Samaritan's Purse. And that group we've been working with over 15 years for me, Sandy close to the same. Great group to work with. They are now at the moment in 5 locations from this storm. They were already in 3 locations prior to this storm. So they have 2 locations in Florida right now, 1 in Georgia, and the 2 closest to us are around Asheville, North Carolina. We don't have plans of a team going yet. We do hope to get a team out from this church. We've sent many teams over the years out. Some of you in this room have been on those teams. This is going to be a long one. It's going to go into January, February. It's going to be a very long cleanup, and then wherever they decide to do as far as rebuild. It fell in their backyard. I mean, they're located in Boone, North Carolina. Boone got hit really bad. Sandy and I have actually volunteered at Billy Graham Cove in Asheville, as well as Black Mountain, where there's an orphanage. We spent a lot of time there. The orphanage where we worked, half of it's just gone. The mountain came down on top of it. I mean, we were talking about our youth group going there this coming summer possibly to do mission work. They may be cleaning up, but they won't be serving or living in those cabins because they're literally just gone. They were wiped out by the mountainside. So we have brochures out in the lobby that you can pick up and take about Samaritan's Purse. I advise you to go to Samaritan's Purse's website, either samaritans.org or vpvolunteer.org to actually go online and volunteer. They'll tell you about all the possible deployments that you can go to, how you can help, finances. Obviously, that's a big one. If you can actually give to them, you can do it online or you can mail into them. Prayer is number one. Pray for the people serving. Pray for the people affected by the storm. Pray that we put the team together from this church. We send a blast out to a group of people all the time. So far, we've only had one response from that blast. If you want to be part of that blast, let me know. Let Sandy know. We'll probably put a sheet out the counter where you can actually sign up to get those blasts. So if we know there's going to be a deployment from this church, you'll get a notification of that deployment. If you can join us, great. If you can't, you can't. I also encourage you to go on the VP volunteer site if you're led to go by yourself or with a couple of friends from your neighborhood. They need a lot of people. In the beginning, there's plenty of volunteers. Down the road, and we probably won't send a team out till probably November sometime, they get more and more sparse as it leaves the news. So come November, come December, come January, they'll be hurting for people because they'll be worrying about other things at that point. I mean, whatever John taught us about tonight, we're worrying about this storm, the election. I mean, there's just so much going on in the news that this will be out of the news by next week. So again, you have any questions, feel free to see Sandy or myself. And we'll be out the counter after this evening. If you would like to get our blast, stop by, give us your name, and you do need to be in the church directory to actually be part of that blast. So if you're not in there, you'll have to sign up for our church newsletter and information as well. And that's it. God bless.
Thanks, buddy.
Looking forward to your talk.
I'll put my kippah back on. Gary and Sandy got that for me. Okay. Yeah, the information on Sam's Purse is on your yellow sheet. So that'll tell you how to get there if you don't already know. And again, if you can volunteer, everybody understands that, but they can always use money. There's a lot of these things are very costly to help out, and the government is not doing it. You know, and I mean, you all know my politics, but when I hear things like, we can't afford to send any more aid, what do you mean you can't afford to send any more aid? Where's my tax dollars go? Oh, that's right, they're in Ukraine and some of these other places. Not against Ukraine, I'm just saying these are Americans. We should be taking care of Americans. And so Americans can take care of Americans still. We don't have to go through the government to do that. So if anybody's going to do it, it ought to be the Church of Jesus Christ. That's just my opinion, but I know I'm right. So I had some notes in here. All right, let's get started here. So as we look at this tonight, actually, can I get the first slide up there? You might know that this is the beginning this evening of Rosh Hashanah. So L'Shana Tova, Happy New Year to each one of you. So beginning now, and then moving forward. How does that work? I think it goes that way, right? Yeah, there you go. It's always good to eat apples with honey, have a sweet remembrance of the year, because who knows what's coming next. There's a lot coming. I suspect that not just in Israel, but around the world, but certainly Israel, the Middle East, the United States, October is going to be a very busy and complicated month in the U.S. And what happens with this election is going to dramatically affect what happens in the Middle East and some of these other places. As we get into this, I need to say something. I think that it occurred to me on Sunday. I made a comment, did anybody read the news? Did you see what had happened last week? And some people did, and I mentioned Nasrallah, who had been killed. And then I realized, you know what, John? Some people are probably confused by some of that. Here's a bunch of Christians celebrating over the death of somebody, and that's kind of inside out. What's that all about? It's not that we're celebrating over his death, except that he's a murderer. But in the larger sense of that topic, is that I think it happens in the body of Christ, where not everybody has the same understanding of the Word of God. Every Christian doesn't have the very same interpretation of prophecy. And so, not that I want to defend and explain every little thing tonight, but I want to say that, if you're new to the church, we haven't had a prophecy update in a while. I think we had one or two, actually probably immediately after October 7th last year, and then one in November. And then the next one we had wasn't until June, when Jill and Renee and I came back from Israel, and we gave you an update on some of the things that we'd experienced over there. And so, so if you're new with us and you don't understand some of those things, you'll learn some of that tonight. I do believe that it's very important that Christians understand the importance of Israel, and the importance of prophecy in the first place, but the importance of Israel, how they factor into all of God's plans. Very often for a prophecy update, I might put something like, a quote from Matthew 24 or something from Isaiah or something like that on the top of the page. So I put this Romans passage. Paul says this. Look at it, would you? Paul, in his definitive treatise on Christian doctrine. I mean, the book of Romans is like a mind blower in terms of his detail and his explanation of appropriate Christian theology, doctrine. And after he goes through 8 chapters, Paul dives into a section of the book of Romans, beginning chapter 9, 10, and 11, which for some people, and I know it was for me for a long time, it's like, what are you talking about? I don't understand. We went from, there is now, therefore, no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. There's no condemnation. There'll never be any separation, us from him and all the wonderful, glorious stuff. And then, boom, chapter 9, suddenly he's talking about, our election, our predestination and all this. And then our Reformed friends are saying, oh, this means this and this means that. And Calvin meant that. And it's like, Paul didn't know Calvin. Like, why did he write this? What's his point in all of this? And his point is, listen to me, his point in Romans 9, 10, and 11 is to speak to the church in Rome. And the church in Rome, not a church that he began, but a church in Rome that was made up of Jewish and Gentile believers. And he's answering a question that he believes they're asking, which is, well, what about Israel then? If God has done all this for the Gentiles, then what about us? That's the question that he presumes, and rightly so, that they'd be asking, and he answers it in those chapters. I'm not going to go through that tonight, but I put here chapter 11 because we'll touch on this a couple times tonight. He asks a question. I say then, has God cast away his people? Now, there are many, in a growing percentage of the Church of Jesus Christ in America and the world right now, who would say, of course he has. They believe that. It's called replacement theology, and they've got some fancy names for it besides replacement theology, but replacement tells you exactly what they believe, that the church has replaced Israel in God's economy. No, heresy. And because that makes God a promise breaker. He asks, I ask then, has God cast away his people? No way. Certainly not, he says. And then he says, I also am an Israelite. I'm of the seed of Abraham, the tribe of Benjamin. God has not cast away his people whom he foreknew. And he goes on from there and throughout the rest of the chapter, and he unpacks that. And like I said, we'll look at some of that later on. It's important that we understand it as we talk about Israel, as we talk about what's going on in the world today, and how the church factors into some of this, and some of the very important prophetic passages that some of us in this room are very, familiar with, and we may have our theories about, well, based on this, and the rapture's going to happen here, and a lot of us just have it all figured out, and I don't know that you can really figure all that stuff out as much as I love it and think I see things sometimes, but only God knows exactly how all this is going to go. But I'll say this before we go any further. It's very important that the Church of Jesus Christ, not just Calvary Chapel, Central Box, but every believer, pray for Israel. Paul will say that in chapter 11, that it's our job to provoke Israel to jealousy. Now, we have provoked Israel to many things over 2,000 years. Jealousy has rarely been one of those. We have provoked them to anxiety. We have provoked them to suicide. We have provoked them to all sorts of things, not jealousy. What's Paul's point? His point is that a Jewish person ought to be able to look at a Christian and say, wow, there is a quality of relationship with my God that I don't have, but you have. How do you have that? You're a goy. How do you have that? That's provoking them to jealousy. That's what we should be doing. And we don't do it by always saying, Isaiah, 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 Isaiah 53. It's like there are a lot of other passages in the Old Testament. It's surprising, but there are. And there are many ways that we can do this, but mostly it's by loving the Jew. And we tend not to do that. And so I say that it's important for the church to do that over the years, and I mentioned over this last year especially. The Almond Branch Initiative started up. Jill Petrie was the one who really initiated that, but Renee and I and a couple of others are very much a part of it. The Almond Branch Initiative is a separate organization that takes contributions from the church and sends them over to Israel to help people. And much of what we help out with is the military. We're not buying ammo. We're not buying guns. It's not that kind of thing. We're not going no time to go into all the details here, but many of you know the basics, which is that if you have a son or daughter, or if you have served in the Army, the Air Force, the Navy, the Marines, any of those, your understanding of what the military provides a recruit is quite different from what a new member of the IDF has. They have boots. They have a uniform, usually a used uniform from a couple of generations earlier. They stay on a base that looks like a wartime base, not a. It's entirely different than you think, and we help them out, and in doing that it gives us an opportunity. We help out those who don't have the funds to buy some of those extra things for themselves that others in their unit may have, and it gives us an opportunity to share Christ with them. And so if you're interested in knowing more, if you're not already on the mailing list, Jill and Renee will be out at the countertop, and you can talk to them. Give us your email address, and we'll keep you on the list. So sounds like everybody's propositioning you tonight, but we're just saying if you want information, we can give you that information. So, okay. Well, some things have been happening. You've probably noticed. I'm not going to rehearse everything that's happened over the last year, but we're all familiar with what happened on, Black Sabbath, October 7th of 2023. The thousands who died were taken hostage, and then the war that began from there over the last basically year at this point. Israel has, for the most part, won the war in Gaza. There's been a lot of anxiety over that for many people, but they have won the war and the war is not with the people of Gaza. The war is with a terrorist political organization called Hamas. Hamas is the problem. Hamas is the problem in the south, in the Gaza Strip, and Hamas is the problem, there primarily. Hezbollah is the problem up in the north in predominantly Lebanon and Syria. And when I mention these, and I realize a lot of us here know this already, but Hamas and Hezbollah are they're proxies, or they're clients, you would say, of Iran. Iran, up until yesterday, Iran has been working solely through proxies. And Israel stripped away all their proxies, for the most part, in Hezbollah, and that's what prompted these 182 missiles yesterday. And so I want us to kind of walk through some of these things. Let me do this. I'm going to set my clock for 8:15. You got a clock? Set your clock for 8:15. I'm going to spend all this time setting my alarm. That would be silly. So that we can do a little Q&A before we end. Of course, what happened yesterday, I think everybody should know this, but 182 ballistic missiles came during the night. These ballistic missiles are hypersonics. They travel 1,200 miles from Iran. If you go Tehran to Jerusalem, just draw a straight line, that's 1,200 miles. Takes 12 minutes. That's a fast rocket. The vast majority of them were shot down, most of them by Israel, and others by, the Brits were also over there, but especially the U.S. So the U.S., the U.S. has not been helpful to Israel as it has been helpful in the past. Just a different administration has a whole different perspective on Israel. The Biden administration, the Biden-Harris administration, it's a whole different perspective on Israel. They talk the talk, but they don't walk the walk. And so they have been okay on the defensive side, but not in terms of getting the job done and eliminating the problem. It's amazing how the population of the world and America exercises an entirely different logic when it comes to Israel than it would if it was us. If the people in Mercer County were sending missiles across the border into Bucks County, we wouldn't put up with it. We'd go after them. We'd wipe them out. That's a Jersey boy speaking, but we would. We'd get rid of them. Because it's just wrong. It's self-defense, and we wouldn't put up with it. But when it comes to Israel, the entire world uses a different set of rules. And sadly, the church uses a different set of rules because we say, well, it's not right to kill. And yet you would kill. If you had to defend yourself, if you had to defend, your child, your spouse, something like that, you would do what you had to do. It's a natural thing to do, and God does not look down on it. He doesn't say thou shalt not kill in the commandment. He says thou shalt not murder. And so anyhow, without getting onto all that. So what prompted yesterday or last night's attack? What prompted last night's attack was that Israel has systematically been eliminating almost all, it's astounding to me, they have systematically eliminated almost all the top command structure of Hezbollah. And so we'll come back to some of this later on. Let's go here. That's Nasrallah. I must have put this in. So that's a picture of some of the rockets coming in. I guess I put these in a different order. So that's a picture, if you would, of 182 rocket hits. That's New Jersey. Okay, that's Israel, which is the size of New Jersey. How do you feel about that? Just calm, it's cool. Okay. Yeah, I mean, imagine that. Part of the reason that Israel has done what it's done to go after Hezbollah in the north. Here's a tunnel. We've all seen pictures of tunnels. When we think of these tunnels, we think of Hamas. Hamas has done this between the Gaza Strip and Israel itself, Israel proper. And yet there are more tunnels, as many tunnels as have been discovered and now dismantled in the south. There are more of them than there were that Hamas had constructed. And they're elaborate. I mean, one of these tunnels is underneath the Litani River. When we were there in May and June, people, some of you who went with us on the tour in 23, we went with Ilan. And Ilan took us, he gives us a strategic briefing when we're there, and he was talking about the Litani River, and people were complaining for years, like, we're hearing something going on underneath us. Is it seismic? Is it an earthquake? Like, what's going on? No, they're drills. People were doing construction work down below them, and then even down below the river itself. So Israel wants to push Hezbollah up above the Litani River, and yet they can get under the Litani River and come right in. And so they're well equipped. They've got weapons in there, et cetera, et cetera. So they wanted to eliminate these tunnels. They wanted to eliminate the command structure. I am so out of order here, but I'm just going to move around and see what I find. Let's see. Well, I guess some of the things that I thought I was putting in there never got here. So I'll just do finger puppets and make it up as I go. Let's see. Okay, so long ago and far away. I can tell the story. Israel, no matter what you think about Israel, they deserve enormous respect on many levels, and one of those levels is their intelligence network. Their intelligence network has enabled them to fit in places. Remember, they're Jews, but they're, when you think of a Jewish person, I don't know what your image is, the skin color and shape of the face and that sort of thing. I don't know what your thoughts are, but Jewish people come from all over the world. And so you have some that many would have a Sephardic look, darker, olive-toned, and others who look like they're European or they're redheads, or there's all sorts of different sizes, shapes, etc. One of the groups that we worked with for years with the Almond Branch was a group called Duv Devan. Duv Devan is a special ops group. If you want to, it's got some language, so don't read it if you don't like language. But it's called Brotherhood of Warriors, and it's all about how one becomes a part of Duv Devan. Duv Devan is a group of young men who train to masquerade and to look like someone who lives in the territories, like in the West Bank or in Gaza or something like that, even to the point of masquerading as an old woman, even in some cases belly dancers. Not old women belly dancer, but even belly dancers. Dig my own hole, I'll never get out of it. But with a weapon, I might add. And the intent behind that special ops group is to not kill necessarily, but to arrest those who are the money people, the brains of the terrorist operations, the money people, to nab them, throw them in a truck, and take them off to interrogation. And so they have a number of these groups, and Duv Devan is one of them. Duv Devan is just a Hebrew word that you would translate as cherry, like from a tree. I'll never forget, I asked the commander one time, the Moti, I said, so why do you call a group of tough dudes cherry? He said, well, some cherries are very sweet and delicious, and others are poison, they'll kill you. Like, okay, I get it. And so that's what they do. Anyhow, my point is they masquerade, and they did this in their intelligence operations throughout Lebanon. Remember, their enemy is not Lebanon. Their enemy is not the Lebanese people. Their enemy is the Hezbollah structure that has taken over the government and ruined the economy up in Lebanon. And there are many Christians. It's important for us to realize sometimes Lebanon is full of Christians. Syria, I don't know how many Christians are actually left after some of the things that have happened there over the years, but northern Iraq especially, many Christians. The fastest growing church in the world is in Iran. Christians. So there's Christians throughout the Middle East. So don't just think someone's an Arab and they're bad. No, it's a radical Islamic issue who hate Israel. That's the enemy, right? And so Israel has done their work over the years. They had a lot of homework done, and it paid off in these last few months that they were able to give Netanyahu and the war panel the information they needed to know how and when to take out some of their leadership team. You might recall it was mid-September, suddenly there were all these pagers. You think, why are people using pagers? I haven't used a pager since 1980 something. But they thought it was a low-tech way of communicating with one another, and it worked for them. But Hezbollah didn't know that along the way, Israel had intercepted some of these pagers and had put some explosive in them. And where do you keep a pager? You on your belt, or if something goes off, you pick it up and look at it. And so it started with pagers, and then it was cell phones, and even in some cases laptops. And some people called it Operation 72 Virgins. Some people call Operation Circumcision. And the point was that people were being, some died, but not many, but severely wounded, so much so that it was filling up the hospitals. It was clogging the medical system in Lebanon, and it bought Israel some time to make some more headway. But in the process of doing that, they were able to take out many of the commanders by either, a gun or and the precision of the weaponry, coming off of an F-35 is amazing what they've been able to do. You could find all these videos. I'm not going to show them all to you tonight. So the interesting thing about Nasrallah, he was in Beirut. You may recall that what happened, so this is last week, middle of the week, Netanyahu went to New York to speak at the United Nations. He wasn't planning to do it. Do you read your Old Testament? No, really. I love some of these stories. I was asking Renee, and I didn't look it up. I keep forgetting the guy's name. Who was the big fat guy, like Jabba the Hutt? What was his name? Come on, Don't you read your Bibles? Ehud was the hero, right? The left-handed warrior. He took out his sword and he stuck it in the guy's, and the dirt came out. Remember that whole story? Is Ehud, but anyhow, it's these kind of stories, or you read them in Samuel or in the Kings, about how Jezebel is thrown down and the dogs eat her. It's this is the same God, by the way. We see, this is what I want us to understand. We're seeing an army. We see warriors doing these things, but it is the same God. It's the same God who gave Ehud the intelligence to do what he did, taking out, I'm just going to call him Jabba the Hutt, and to take him out, or some of these others, right? Eglon, thank you. Tito should be teaching. There you go. But here's what's interesting. I find it fascinating. Netanyahu had no desire, no intention of speaking before the United Nations. But he knew that if he went there, it would distract Nasrallah. So he went. He took his wife, got aboard a jet. He goes to the UN, and you know the story. He goes in, and at least half of the people at the UN, they all get up and leave because they hate Israel. Think about this. They hate that little nation so much. A total of 10.5 million people, 1 million of which are Muslim. They hate them so much that they get up like little middle schoolers and they walk out. So he gives the speech before the UN, and he says, he never mentions Nasrallah's name, even though Nasrallah is the issue, right? And he's talking about Iran. But he knew that Nasrallah, in doing that, would invite his friends over to watch Netanyahu, and that Nasrallah would be distracted by it. The other thing, it's fascinating, you know, I'm not making this stuff up. You can find it from the same news sources I just gave you. But someone shook his hand, Nasrallah, one of these intelligence guys in Mossad or Duvdevan or somebody, shook his hand at one point. And there was something that he had in his hand that was a trackable material, right? So when it probably just felt like sweat. So when he shook his hand, he left that on his hand, on Nasrallah's hand. Now they could track where he was and how far underground he was. Because if you recall, well, I won't go on with this all night, but it's just, to me, there's such drama. That's why I say you got to read your Old Testament to appreciate how this went down. Because what happened was, Bibi never mentions Nasrallah. He finishes his speech, he leaves, and they already had a plan. They had the plan already that when he finishes the speech, they would complete the operation. They had jets in the air, and they knew that when he finished the speech, bunker buster bombs. They dropped 80, how much was it? 8,000 tons. Think about that. 8,000 tons of, you know, if you're familiar with a bunker buster bomb, you know, but we started hearing about these in the Iraq War, you know, when they were trying to get, what's his name? And bunker buster bomb, it started in the Second World War, the idea of a bomb that would, it could go down and basically clear out about 60 feet of rock and soil. And then they would systematically come with the next one, and the next one, and the next one, so that it suffocated Nasrallah and his buddies eating popcorn watching the UN speech. And they knew they got him. They got him that way because they knew how to play his personality. I'm impressed. Some of you don't look that impressed, but I find that fascinating because, and I'm not, don't misunderstand. Yeah, there's a part of me that I'm entertained by it too, I'll admit. But what I love about it is that's the exact same personality that I read when I read my Bible. That's how God works. We think, God, war? Yeah, read the stories in the Bible. God is a God of intrigue, and he does these things. So anyhow, fascinating story. I could tell you more. You know that, but I won't. And so I say this to say, now these missiles come over last night. Now what happens? Well, and why did the missiles come over? Well, Iran had to retaliate. This is an honor-shame culture, and they can't be put into that light. They have to save face. They have to regain face, and so that's why Iran did what they did. What I'd like us to take a look at here. Did I have it in here? Well, here's one example. So, did the other? Good. This little picture, now here's the Persian Gulf. You probably know what that is. Let me just go back for a minute. Let's go to the Persian Gulf. All right, this will work. So, here's the Persian Gulf right here. Persia, or Iran, Persian Gulf. Now, so there's a little dot right there. That's a place called Karg Island. And the picture that I have here for you, that's what Karg Island looks like now. The picture of what it's going to look like soon is soon to come. I'll show you. But I don't have it tonight because it hasn't happened yet. That's where all of Iran's oil comes out of. During the Trump administration, you might recall, I should back up, during the Obama administration, have you noticed there's a difference in personalities, not just that, but in political philosophy that happens between administrations? Have you noticed that? I don't care what you think about Trump. It really doesn't matter. I don't want to marry the guy. I don't want him as my pastor, right? But have you ever read your Old Testament? Did you ever read about Jehu? Remember Jehu? Remember what Jehu did? Ahab and Jezebel, you've heard of them? After Ahab died, Jezebel keeps living. Jehu comes on the scene. And he's a rough character. I don't know if he had a Twitter account, but if he did, he put out some sick tweets, no doubt about it. He was a rough dude. He was a bad guy in a lot of ways. And he had a past. Oh, did he have a colorful, people like to put it that way in church, but colorful's not the word. It was just a gritty, ugly past. But he brought God's righteousness against Jezebel. He's the one who forced the Israelis in the northern kingdom to recognize that God cares about you and he's calling you to repentance. He didn't do it, not because Jehu was a great spiritual man, but God used that man, just like he has used President Trump. And it sounds like I'm campaigning for him. I'm not. I'm just saying to Christians, because a lot of Christians are like, well, I don't know. I get squeamish. Yeah, me too. I don't let it bother me because I look at the things that are important in the world that have to get done. Because, by the way, you and I've said this before, and I know that people probably roll their eyes, at least inside their heads. I don't know where else you would roll your eye, but you know what I mean. Oh, look. But it seems sometimes that people, brush it off. But we are in the midst of the most consequential presidential campaign the nation's ever seen, ever. And it's my personal belief that depending upon who wins this election, there may or there may not be another presidential election in 4 years. But that's not the topic tonight. The topic is that God uses some of the weirdest people to accomplish his purposes, right? Just like he did King Cyrus, the prince of Persia, well, the king of Persia. And so I say all that to say, it was Obama who gave all this money to Iran. When Trump became president, he broke the agreement, couldn't take the money back, but he established harsh sanctions against Iran because money talks. That's what works. And so he established harsh sanctions against Iran, and they were coming to their knees by the time Biden became president. But Biden reversed it. And as a result of that, Iran began producing oil again. See, some of you think, he's just campaigning for Trump. That's not what I'm doing. I'm trying to paint the picture so that we understand the geopolitical impact of these things. Iran began producing oil again to a world that desperately needs oil. And billions of dollars, petrodollars, came into their coffers, and that enables them to spin more uranium and get closer and closer to a nuclear weapon, which is probably just months away at this point. I don't know how you feel about that, but think about that one, because they're not rational when it comes to how to use it or not use it. And I say all that to say, now Israel. See, the U.S. has historically had leadership position in the world. See, I called this tonight a prophecy update. What's next for Israel in the world? It's the world we have to look at, not just Israel. What we often do as Christians, we're like, what's next? When's the rapture? Well, it's not about us getting out of here. It's about how God wants to use us until he takes us out of here. And so what is next for the world? Well, part of it is if Iran continues to have that money by producing that oil, they're going to create a nuclear weapon. Well, now the power has shifted from the U.S. to Israel. Israel is the one who will, I don't know if they're going to, but in my opinion, they're probably going to take out Carg Island. They're going to take that out so they can't produce oil. And either at the same time or right near it is all of their nuclear facilities, many of them, you see them here, this area here, you might hear of Elam You heard the word Elam before. Many people say that's an ancient name for Iran. Well, actually, not really. Persia is the ancient name. Elam is a province in the southwestern area bordering the Persian Gulf. And so the Bushehr nuclear facility right down here, right near the shore of the Persian Gulf, sits on a fault line. And many people think that could be one of the next to go. But in any event, don't mistake this. Don't think that Israel doesn't also have their eyes on taking out those nuclear facilities. They know they need to. And what I've heard is that they're waiting to do that. They want to see who gets elected in the U.S. first. See, I don't know if you've thought about this, but the world really looks to the U.S. See, United States citizens get all caught up in what we think about this. Now, I'm not saying abortion is not a major issue. Obviously, it is. There are a lot of major issues in our nation. The economy is a major issue. There's so many major issues. But the world looks to the U.S. for leadership. In this room, a lot of us are old enough to remember Reagan and Thatcher and how they worked together in the world, and Europe and the Middle East really appreciated when Great Britain and the United States worked together between Reagan and Thatcher. Or during the Iraq War, Bush and Tony Blair, also, Great Britain. Those partnerships are important to the world because there's strength that the world looks for, because strength from America and the heart of Europe means stability in economy, in shipping. Shipping. Have we thought about that one? Those kinds of things are important in the world. So who's in the White House actually is major, because you've never in the history of the world, has there been a nation that has Christian roots and has operated by what we call Judeo-Christian principles other than the United States and Israel in her glory days, the days of King David. Try another nation on for size. You got one? I've never heard another candidate that works. It's just those two. And when that solid Christian influence, and look at Israel, that's not a Christian influence, but even though they don't know God in the way you and I do, they love God. They love a lot of things about God. They want to do the things that are right. They're afraid to upset God by breaking what they perceive to be his law. I mean, it's not the way you and I would look at it. I wouldn't call them saved. I'm just saying that God uses that, and he uses it for his glory and for the benefit, because that glorifies God, for the benefit of the peace of the world. There's a lot we don't stop to think about when it comes to these topics. And so, it sounds to you probably like I'm rambling, but I don't know why you would think that, because I'm just talking. But a couple things I just want to say, and then we can go to some questions. But I talked about that, blah, blah, blah. Mentioned that, sure. Look, there's a lot of key passages. We're not going to go through all those tonight. I've put them on your sheet. Daniel chapter 9 is a very important passage. And, if you've been around here for a while, you're probably thinking that's all he ever talks about, Daniel chapter 9, verses 24 through 27. I do that because you really can't understand end-time prophecy without understanding those 4 verses. A little complicated, but not all that complicated. But the first verse of that tells us that the prophecy is not for the church. Gabriel doesn't say this prophecy is for America, or this prophecy is for the church. The prophecy is given to Daniel, the prophet, back in the late 5th century BC. So he says, this is for your people and your holy city. Well, who's that? That's Israel and Jerusalem. It's all about Israel and Jerusalem. We have a tendency as the church to adopt all that and apply it to ourselves. It has an influence on us, but it's about Israel. And that's where we miss things sometimes. We think it ought to be about us, the church. No, it affects the church in some ways, but it's principally about Israel. But there are some things that are very close to happening. Now, I'm not going to go through it all, and I'm sure someone will ask some questions, but I will say this. Daniel says, at the end of those 4 verses, he says there is coming a leader, and we would probably call him the Antichrist. Daniel doesn't call him that, but we would probably call him that. And this one will appear on the scene, and I believe it's soon, and he will, some people say he will write a covenant. Actually, it says that he reinforces or he strengthens a covenant. The suggestion is it's a pre-existing covenant. It was already there. So you can think through and join all the long line of others who speculate on it, but it's going to be a pre-existing covenant. It may be the old covenant, where this one comes along and strengthens that covenant with Israel, and the suggestion is Israel and the rest of the world. Why would that happen? I don't know. But I would suggest to you that it could be that that happens right after a major conflict between Israel and the rest of the world. I'm going to go through something very quickly here. There is coming a battle. You've heard about it a lot if you've been here before. Other people talk about it too. But in Ezekiel 36, God says to Ezekiel, speak to the hills, speak to the valleys, speak to the cities, and speak to the rivers of Israel, and say, the world has done this to you, but I will restore you, and I will bring my people back to the hills. Next chapter, it's happening in sequential order. Next chapter, chapter 37, which was what David Ben-Gurion used as his authority in 1948 in calling this new nation the land of Israel. God tells Ezekiel, look, tell me what you see. He says, I see nothing but dried out bones. And God begins to bring these bones together, and they stand up. And he puts flesh on those bones in a vision that Ezekiel has. Now what do you see? Well, I see them standing up with flesh on them. Now what do you see? He says, speak to the spirit or speak to the wind. What do you see? He says, I see them becoming real men, full of the Spirit. Well, I would say if you look at Israel today, we're somewhere in between, because they're not full of the Spirit yet. They don't know Messiah, but they're on their way. And let me tell you, what they're saying in Israel right now, what the news channels are saying in Israel, is what you and I ought to be saying when we look at what's going on in the world right now, that this is all biblical. You can use that expression a lot of different ways. You can say, this came right out of the Bible, that's biblical, that's the way it's looking. Or you can say, this is like biblical proportions, like that was a flood of biblical proportions, or that kind of thing. Either way, it works, right? No one's ever seen it before. It leads you to long for God, right? Well, that's what's happening. We've seen it in our work with Almond Branch. We see people talking more about God. They're interested. They want to know more. At some point, after Ezekiel 37 happens, that's when God puts, he says, hooks in the jaw of Russia. That's called Gog and Magog. Magog is a land area and a people group that is Russia. Those who were from ancient Magog are the forebears of the modern Russians, okay? By the way, speaking of Russia, who does Vladimir Mad Vlad Putin, who does he want to be president of the United States? It must be Trump, because we keep hearing that there's some thing between them, right? No, he wants Kamala Harris. Why? She can be manipulated. She's weak. Who do you think the Ayatollah Khamenei, Khamenei, the guy who's in hiding right now, who do you think he wants for president? It's not Trump. He's like, I want to kill America, but I like that Trump. No, it's not like that at all. He wants Harris. Why? Is weak, manipulable. When the sheep don't have protection, when the sheep don't have sheepdogs, the wolves devour the sheep. It happens in schools, it happens in churches, it happens around society, and it happens in the world right now. Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, they're the wolves. They're coming out because there's no one holding them back. There's no strong leadership out of Washington, anyhow. So I say this to say, God says, I'll put hooks in the jaw of Magog. Gog is an angelic prince, a prince over that whole landmass. He's the one who instigates it in the spirit, right, and puts the ideas into the mind of the leader, the men, right, of the nation. And because they already have existing relationships already, Russia, Persia, Iran, the Sudan, it's called Ethiopia, but the Sudan and Egypt at one time were one group, actually included, and then Libya. So Libya, Ethiopia, or Sudan and Egypt together, the Eastern Germanic peoples, all coming together with Turkey, the House of Togarmah, which is Turkey. They still go by the same name, the House of Togarmah. And they all come to bring a war against Israel. That's what it looks like. And that's called the War of Magog, or the Gog-Magog invasion. So people have been talking about it for a long time. But the closer we get to it, you can see that the pieces are on the chessboard. They're there. How long do you think that the pieces stay on the chessboard? Do we think, they're going to be there forever? See, because we think linear. We think everything just continues on nice day after day after day. Because after all, I'm being sarcastic when I say this. So I'm not trying to insult anybody. But I say it as a device to hopefully get your attention. Thanks. I was wondering if you were going to tell me, because I can see the clock. So, thanks. But we believe that. We think everything always works out great for us because we're Americans. No, it doesn't. Have you talked, some of us, to our parents and what they went through? Or your grandparents and what they went through? Imagine the impact. What's it like to grow up in the Depression and then to go through the war and with another big war after that? I mean, come on. We just haven't experienced it. Those of us born in the 50s and in the 60s and in the 70s, we haven't experienced difficulty. What we think was difficult was nothing compared to what our parents and our grandparents experienced. These things don't last forever, that peace and calm. They don't last forever. Tough times are going to come. And there's another problem that we have, and I'll leave it here. Because we're Christians and we believe, now, I don't know that everybody in the room does, but because we believe in a pre-tribulation rapture, we think all the big nasties happen after I'm gone anyhow. Said who? When? Define big and nasty. There's a whole lot of nasties that can happen before we're taken out of here, before the tribulation itself. So it's Christ that we need. It's Messiah we need day to day. And he's called us for such a time as this. It's an overused expression, but it's still true. To be light and salt in this world. So I'll leave it there. We can go on. I'm sure you've got some questions besides when are you going to end? Yes, sir.
Yes. I was wondering, we haven't heard much reaction from the other Arab nations about what's going on between Israel and Iran. Maybe it's the news that we get. I wonder what information, or if you can comment on what they're hearing over in Israel as far as from the other like Sunni nations such as
Sure.
Saudis or the neighboring countries such as Jordan.
Good question. Yeah. So for those who didn't hear, the question is, well, what about the other Arab nations? Because again, what unites all these people is, that's not the best map to use here, but right? So let's use this one. So, when we see all these different nations, actually, let's go to that one. When we look at these nations like Jordan, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Egypt, etc., and then back out a bit and look at, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Sheba, Dedan, Yemen and Oman and some of those places. Depending upon the group you're talking about, Yemen tends to have a higher percentage. I don't know who knows what, but when you talk about Islam, there are more groups than two, but for the most part, two major factions in Islam, Shia and Sunni. Iran, who are not Arabs, by the way, they would be incensed if they heard you call them that. They're Persians and proud of it. An Arab is someone who comes from the Arabian Peninsula. That's an Arab, okay? So to an American, they're all Arabs, but I'm just saying that that's not the way they see things over there. So the Sunni Muslims are happy to see Israel take out the Shia Muslims because they've been a thorn in their side since about 700 AD. It's been a constant battle for all those years. And so Saudi Arabia, what's his name? bin Salman, Mohammed bin Salman, has said two things. He has said publicly, doesn't matter to me, I just mind my own business and mind the affairs of my country. But privately has said, I love the Israelis, and I'm so glad they did that. Because he's willing to let Israel use airspace. It takes a while to get to Iran, and you have to refuel someplace. So if they can fly over Saudi Arabia, they can refuel en route. He's willing to let them do it if they're going against a Shiite nation. So there's an example there. Whereas you wouldn't expect Syria to. They're a whole different group of Muslims. They're Calawite, Muslims, but it's kind of a strange group. But so for the most part, they're not saying much. But the Sunnis are happy that Iran's being whacked. Other questions?
Yes.
I'll come to you.
Reminded as these events
Can you
occur-
speak louder?
I'm reminded as these events occur of when Bill Salas visited our church
Uh-huh.
and talked about the Elam prophecy. He felt that would be the next prophetic event.
Right.
What is the perspective of Jewish believers concerning those particular events, the Elam, the Ezekiel, and the Psalm 83? Do they acknowledge those prophetic events as we do?
Well, you've asked about Jewish believers or just Jewish people?
Jewish people.
Okay, not believers in Messiah Jesus.
Yes.
Okay. First of all, so the question was, when Bill Salas was here, he talked about the next event possibly being the Elam destruction, Jeremiah 49, and that sort of area. And then from that, you asked about what's the belief of Israelis when it comes to these prophecies like Ezekiel 38 and 39, Psalm 83, etc. Ezekiel 38 and 39, there is more unity. You find a lot of conversation among the rabbis in Israel. They believe that they're seeing, what they believe they're seeing happening between Russia, Iran, and these Magog invasion nations is pretty similar to what we would believe. They see it happening. You can't ignore it. You could choose to look the other way, but they see it and they believe it's that. And so those guys they say the same thing to the generals, like we need to protect ourselves from them. And of course, the generals say the same thing because what do the generals say? This isn't something that's happening in a corner somewhere. Well, what unites Russia and those nations that they're allied with? Mutual defense pact treaties. Someone hits you, I'm going to protect you. That's the idea. Just like we have them, so does Russia. And so you have unity among the rabbis on that. Now, when you start talking about Psalm 83, you don't have unity among Christians over Psalm 83. If you ever want to see a really interesting debate, watch Bill Salas and Amir Tsarfati go at it over Psalm 83. You know, Bill Salas says, this is the Psalm 83 war. But Amir says, no, that was the War of Independence. And then as October 7th happened, it began to continue to unfold. Amir started saying things like, well, it's like the War of Independence hasn't ended. Well, that's kind of like saying it is a Psalm 83 war. But anyway, it's a nice way of saying it. And when it comes to Jeremiah 49, that's an interpretation. But Jeremiah 49 is related to a number of things, and one of those is Damascus. And so Isaiah 17 says that Damascus will be destroyed in one night. By the morning you will look, and it will be no more. Now some people believe that that's a prophecy that was fulfilled many, many years ago. And yet there's no real basis for that, because the walls of Damascus are the ancient walls. They've been there for thousands of years. And yet the Isaiah 17 and Jeremiah 49 say those walls will burn. Oh, how does rock burn? It sounds like it's a nuclear type of fire. Sounds that way. So you don't find unity among the Israeli people over those types of prophecies. But when it comes to Ezekiel, you have it. Yes? Can you stand up and speak louder?
I've been following Jan Markell
Yeah.
for about 9 years.
Okay.
And she does a podcast that you can get on olivetreeviews.org.
Right.
This is exactly what she talked about for the last couple of weeks.
Okay.
Right on point. And Amir
Yeah.
is one of her guests.
Okay.
So,
Good. Thank you.
I
Yeah.
love that.
Yeah. She should be on this list. I think she is. But I highly recommend Jan Markell, Olive Tree Ministries. She's great. I'll see her next week, by the way. I go out there every few months they have what they call a pastor's huddle. They try to get there's so many Reformed pastors around. They're trying to get the dispensational pastors to meet. And so, and actually our topic next week is Reformed, not Reformed theology, but replacement theology. So that'll be very exciting. So I'll say hi to Jan for you. I probably won't see her, but I just figured I'd be a name dropper. So, yes. Can you stand up and speak? Tell us your name, by the way.
Jackie Donald. I would like to know, why doesn't Israel release the film with the atrocities, the proof, so that this anti-Semitism, the people, the AOCs and all of that, can see the horrors and why, it's a...
From October 7th?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why don't they release that? And
I have the answer.
that would be...
I got the answer for you.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So the question was, why doesn't, can I do this too? Okay. No, I like that. I'm not a pulpit pounder, but when someone else does it, at least sign her up for security.
That's my granddaughter who was the cop that was baptized.
The question was, why doesn't Israel release the film about the atrocities? And the answer is, they have. It's available for anybody to see. It was available for every congressman, which actually includes women, so I don't have to be PC and say congresswomen. Congressmen, there's men and women. So anyhow, they're Congress people. So every representative in Congress and every senator and all of the administration had the ability to see it. It's still available for them. Some chose to, and some did not. So the question's not for Israel. You got to talk to AOC. So, but it's been available, and you can find it online yourself.
Why can't we see it? You can see it.
Amir posted.
Sure, you can. When I say Amir on this list on the pink sheet, Amir's site is where is it? Where is it? Anyhow, you can find Amir. The best place to find Amir is on Telegram. It's an easy thing. You can get on your phone, you can get on your computer. And he's got it all there. And
I couldn't have a stomach for it, but I'm saying these people...
it's there. Anybody can see it. You have to want to see it. And if you think someone should see it and they don't know how to get it, you should get it and make them see it. Give them dinner first, and then Make sure it's kosher. Another question. No questions. Really? Yes, sir. Alan. Stand up.
Still trying to piece together what is happening, but it doesn't, I mean, we're agreed that this isn't the Gog-Magog war right now.
This is not.
Right. So, Hezbollah keeps saying, we're going to keep attacking until the war in Gaza is over. Gaza's saying, we're not, until that gets resolved, the hostages come back. So, and then Iran is saying, as long as you're attacking Hezbollah. So, this is just the setup for, like you were saying, do you see this going? It seems like we're on the precipice of either it could all end probably next week, Yahya Sinwar is found and the hostages are released and would everything settle back down, or you think it's just going to steamroll and get bigger and we're on the precipice of if Israel attacks Iran, possibly with nukes? I mean, that seems like a huge escalation.
Yeah.
And from there, I don't see how that gets pulled back. I mean, how does that figure in?
Yeah.
What do you think?
All right. Basically the question is, where do we go from here? And how is this, is there any way that this gets put back in the can? No, you don't put it back in the can. Iran, or not Iran, but Gaza has been pretty well scrubbed. I mean, you've still got people living down in the south along the Philadelphia corridor. You still have some leadership of Hezbollah, and they once had 185,000, count them, 185,000 rockets and missiles, a large portion of which were guided missiles, and many of which they don't know they're not releasing how many, that may actually have chemical and possibly biological heads, not just ballistic. That's an interesting question. And Israel knows those things, so Israel has plans to get all of that somehow. So there's that. Iran has to do whatever they've got to do. They got to save face, and so they think they have at this point. I suspect, it's just a Hessler suspicion, that's not worth anything, that Iran would be satisfied not to do anything else at this point in order to get things settled down, because they want stability of some sort too. They've got a people who hate the leadership in Iran and would like them dead, so they have to take care of their people too. Anyhow, all that said, Israel must survive, and going back to some sort of a hegemonic balance like they kind of had before is not a happy balance. All it will do is enable their neighbors to continue to ramp up their armaments against Israel. They have to deal with it once and for all. That's my opinion, and I think that's the biblical perspective. I believe that one of the preconditions for the Magog invasion is that these people, Israel, God says to Magog, you will come in against the people who've been called from the nations, who are a people living in villages without walls. Well, there's 230 miles of walls in Israel, around the West Bank or Judea, Samaria, and all that. So those theoretically would come down. And the sense that you get from Ezekiel 38 is that it says Israel's living safely. The idea is confidently. Well, they don't have that confidence right now. They have to push their enemies way back in order to do that. So it's my opinion that Israel's opinion is we need to push and push and push and push and push and push until we have dealt as far as we can possibly go. And I suspect, as I read the scripture, they will have done that. And there will probably be some period of some sort of peace. I'm not saying it's 5 years long. I don't think it's long, but that's only my opinion, before the Magog invasion occurs. And that invasion, the IDF will fail to prevail. And God is going to show himself mighty. That's when he gets their attention. I believe, that's only my opinion because it could be anything, but I believe that that's the setup for Daniel 9:27. whether it's Netanyahu or someone else, goes on international TV and says, now you got to deal with us. After the King James says 5/6 of the invading army is wiped out. I think he said, now you got to deal with us. I mean, you got to think, how does it play on CNN or Fox tomorrow morning, right? That's when the world now listens to Israel. So it seems like they have to finish the job, and finish the job is not a local affair that gets done in a week and a half. And it could go nuclear. It's not going to be a worldwide nuclear war until we talk about Armageddon. That's my opinion. But I think that there will be the use of tactical nukes. That's only my opinion. So, look, it's 8:34, and we want to rescue our helpers in children's ministry. So why don't we do this? Let's stand and pray. If you have questions, we can talk, but why don't we do that? Thanks for your attention tonight. Really appreciate you guys coming out.